All right, let's get into this. iPhone SE 4. Apple is calling it the iPhone 16e, the latest iPhone at the greatest price. And the design, it looks like it's based on the iPhone 14, which means it is top-notch in the best sense of the word. It has a notch on the top, which visually differentiates it from other phones because most other phones don't have a notch anymore, but also from Apple's higher-end iPhone 16 and highest-end iPhone 16 Pro, which have all moved to the capsule-shaped dynamic island. The functionality should be similar, if not the same. You still have Face ID, you still have the selfie camera, and the selfie camera looks like it's the same as on the iPhone 16, so good quality selfie camera. You also have, oh, I'm getting an uplift so that I'm not so low down. There we go. Thank you so much. And let's see what's next. It's strong. It's using Apple. It is not titanium like the Pros, but it does have an aerospace grade aluminum enclosure, so very similar to the regular iPhone models. And it has Apple's ceramic shield, which is their version of Gorilla Glass. Apple is such a huge vendor that they can command early access to technology. So whatever Gorilla Glass version other vendors will get next is probably the one that Apple has now. And I like it in that it does seem to really protect against falls. But the way that glass works is you can make it softer, which means that it's less likely to shatter, but more likely to scratch. Or you can make it harder, which means it is less likely to scratch, but more likely to shatter. And it's very hard to get a good mix of both of those things. So this, like previous generation iPhones, really is doing more for shatter protection, which means you should still be careful about scratches on it. It has the action button, which I really like. It lets you quick launch something like the old, you saw the ringer switch there where you could turn it off or on, and headroom adjustment, awesome. Where you could turn it off or on, and the ringer, that is, and that goes all the way back to the Palm Trios, which was a great feature. But now you can still keep it on silent, but you can also do things like make it do translations or accessibility or Apple Intelligence, which I'll get to later, or the flashlight. So whatever suits you the best. And then it is USB-C, so no Lightning anymore. RIP skull emoji Lightning. It is gone. The European Union has killed it and mandated that anyone who wants to sell a phone in the European Union, which apparently Apple still wants to do, has to do it with a USB-C cable. I have mixed feelings on this. I think like it's great to have standardization, but I think it was this weird period of time where a bunch of nerds were saying Apple has to use USB-C. I don't want proprietary Lightning, but also Apple has to bring back MagSafe. I don't want to charge with USB-C. And oh, finally, we have this one cable that can charge everything USB-C, which is true. But if I forget about that and just bring my MacBook charger with me, it's got MagSafe on it, which does not charge my iPhone. So unless I just switch to charging my MacBook over USB-C, which I forget about, and it doesn't have any of the advantages of MagSafe on the Mac, you still need at least two chargers. So I think a lot of the stuff is manufactured sort of outrage in the nerd community. But Apple does have to navigate the European Union. I'm also just like a little bit sad because I think like USB-C is like Enterprise C. There's got to be an Enterprise D, a USB-D that's even better. And I don't know if we'll get there as fast as we would have otherwise now that it's in the hands of like government regulators. And also like USB is not great. USB has never been great because you've no idea really what the power delivery is, like how, like what the capacity for it to push power, like what capacity it has to push data. It's like a mystery box all, unto itself. So it's a standard, just not a great one, but we have it. And I'm guessing that's, for most people, that's way better, except for people who have tons of legacy Lightning gear. Comes in black and white, not midnight and starlight, which Apple's been using instead recently, which I'm happy about. I think, black is usually the most popular color for consumer electronics, and white is the most popular alternative. So having those covered, and they have color cases. So it's very much, there's not even a product red, which I think is odd. I think the last iPhone SE, they made a big deal about having a product red ready at launch, no pun intended. And this time they don't. You'd have to get a case for that. I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I know that's really hard to actually believe, but I will. I'll just take a quick look at questions. Am I excited about iPhone 17 leaks? Uh, there's been a ton of them already. I think let's talk about the phone we have, and maybe I'll do a separate video on the phone that we might get. So let's just keep on breaking this down. And if you do have questions, again, just throw them in the chat with a Q in front of them, and I will get to them as soon as I can. 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR display. XDR is Apple's extreme dynamic range, more HDR than HDR. And it does look good. Apple has really good OLED in general. A lot of people think, oh, they just get the displays from Samsung. But my experience or my understanding is that Apple sort of specs out the displays they want, sometimes even with different materials. And they use Samsung to fab the displays. They use Samsung's OLED process. Maybe it's not Samsung for this. I don't know for sure, actually. But historically, they've used Samsung's OLED process. And that's sort of like just using TSMC's, like 4-nanometer process to fab the chip. No one says it's a TSMC A18 chip, but everyone, a lot of people in the tech community love to say it's a Samsung display. Technically, no, Samsung's the factory, and Apple does really good OLED, really good mitigations to prevent burn-in stuff, really good, just in general, OLED displays. So it looks nice. Don't see the brightness levels. Guessing it's not going to be as ridiculous as the iPhone 16s, but still really good. All-day battery life. They're making a big deal about how big a battery they managed to put in here. Apple doesn't talk about milliamp hours. A lot of people wish they would, but there's no really good way to compare that because the demands of a phone are very different. And like the fuel tank size is only one variable. If you have a large fuel tank in a small car versus a large fuel tank in a huge car, the size of the fuel tank doesn't matter that much because the small tank is going to just use so much less fuel and the big truck is going to use so much more fuel that you really have to look at it in terms of like miles per gallon. What does the combination, the package, and that includes everything from the efficiency of the atoms, the silicon, the hardware inside, to the efficiency of the software inside. Like there's a whole bunch of parameters that go into how much you actually consume and doing what. Like everything that radiates uses power, the screen uses power, the radios use power, all that stuff are high demands. And that's also probably why we won't see, like, I think some people were upset that this is like the same size as the mainline iPhones, not smaller like past iPhone SEs have been. But when you look at modern chipsets, the thing that distinguishes them, well, there's two things that really distinguish them. And that is the peak power draw and the amount of heat dissipate, like the amount of heat that they generate. And both of those things aren't in favor of small enclosures. Like the original iPhone SE, the silicon in there is really small. It didn't draw that much power and didn't generate that much heat. If we tried to put like an A18 chip that's in here into a package that small, like it would probably turn off the first time it got a spike for power because it just couldn't pull enough from the battery. And it would probably also overheat really, really quickly and also shut off. So if you want a small phone, you'll have to either get some breakthrough in efficiency, or you'll have to just put up with a much, much lower end or like previous, like years ago sort of performance level chipset. More questions. Let's see. I am not a good navigator of questions, but I am learning. Question, what do we know about the Apple modem chip? I'm going to get to that in just a second. I think that's a really interesting discussion. Well, actually, we can do that now. So Apple introduced a new piece of silicon. Like Apple has had various pieces of silicon over the years. They have the A series, famously introduced with the iPhone 4, the A4 chipset that Apple has just continued to build on. And then because they're very good at scaling larger and smaller, we got the S1, which is like a system in package. The A series are SoCs. So everything is basically on one die, where the system in package puts even more things on a single die. System on a chip versus system in package. And then so we got those for the watch chips, but Apple's also made sensor fusion hubs. I think that was the original S series before this one, or T series. They made the T series, which was essentially iPhone chips inside Macs back when they were dealing with Intel, and Intel was just not adapting the technologies they wanted. So the T series would do things like rendering engines that Intel really couldn't process, or would consume a lot of resources if they processed it on the CPU. They've done the H chips now for the AirPods, where they have amount of silicon that they do. And now we have a C1, which I guess like it's the modem, but M is already being used. So maybe C for cellular. And Apple used to use Infineon, a German company. I forget who the original owners were. Maybe somebody knows. You could throw it in the chat. They used to use Infineon for their modems, and then they moved over to Qualcomm. And I think for a while they also dual sourced their modems. And people would even joke about like, hey, do you have the good Qualcomm modem? Or like, was it Infineon still? Might have been somebody else, but like you have the bad modem, meaning like just Qualcomm was better at, they all worked when you had like full bars and good reception. But the closer you got to lower bars and worse reception, the better the Qualcomm modems would perform. And part of that is just Qualcomm's been making modems for a long time. And part of it is probably because Qualcomm, even though a lot of technologies for modems are supposed to be donated under free, reasonable, and non-discriminatory usage terms, Qualcomm is an IP company. Like they make chips and modems, but mostly they patent things and license things. Like that's huge business for them. And so it wasn't in their best interest to have all that technology shared with the world in like a big kumbaya hippie hipster moment. So Qualcomm just owned a lot of those technologies, especially when it got to 5G. Which is, I'm curious, like I don't think this has, I might be wrong, but I don't think, so let's go back for a minute. There was like this huge diffusion of technologies, and you had Edge and GSM on one side, and you had, I'm totally blanking on what Verizon's was called at the time. And then when we got to LTE, it was like everyone was on the same thing, more or less. In all practical purposes, as a consumer, you could buy almost any phone and use it almost anywhere. But for 5G, like there's different frequencies that people are on. There's a low and medium frequency range, which is sort of like fulfilling the promise of what LTE was meant to be, just LTE-like performance, but in more places and towards the higher end. And then there was radio frequency, am I reversing those? Anyways, there was 1 and 2. 2 was the higher end, the millimeter wave, which Qualcomm was really big on, but most of the world didn't adopt. And it's really line of sight, and things like rain and leaves could get in the way. And just like my Canadian phone just doesn't have it. US phones have it. I'm guessing this doesn't have it. Probably doesn't have it. So it's going to be interesting. Apple bought Infineon, and they've been trying to make modems for a long time. They had a lawsuit with Qualcomm, which didn't go their way, ended up becoming a Qualcomm licensor, put Qualcomm chips in there. But there were a couple of things that were interesting about that. Like one of the rumors for why Apple never put cellular into a Mac was that the licensing terms were not great. Like if you buy an iPhone, you get the modem, but for the iPad, it was like 120, 140 bucks more. And part of that was rumored to go to Qualcomm because the licensing fee scaled rapidly as the cost of the equipment scaled. And with an iPad, like it's in parts, like you're really buying the screen and stuff, and you buy the extra keyboard, you buy the extra pencil. None of that really goes into the retail cost that gets licensed. But with a Mac, like you have so much of that is built in. Like you can get a $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 MacBook at this point, and just throwing hundreds of dollars extra, maybe 1,000 at that point. I don't know what their actual deal is. I don't know if anybody does, or can think about it if they do. But just putting that much, having to license, like that much licensing cost on top of the price would probably be prohibitive. And there might be other reasons too. Some people think it's like the construction and all that, but I think like it was never an incentive to do it. So Apple would just rather you tether to your iPhone or iPad at that point. But maybe with C1 or future C2, C3, whatever it is, there's no more licensing costs. So if the performance is good, it'll just go right into all of Apple's products going forward. And Apple's making a big deal about how power efficient it is. Previously, like Qualcomm would make a system on a chip, including the modem, I believe, for people who were using their Snapdragon chip. So it was just one chip that they had to manage. And Apple was not using the Qualcomm chip, obviously. They were using the A series. So they had almost like a cake layer of modem on top of the chipset, literally in some of the models, maybe all of the models, I'd have to check. But they were literally putting the modem like on top of it. And that's probably not as efficient as you want it to be. And now Apple has this capability of not only using their advantage with fabs of getting very early access to very small process nodes, like whatever the latest TSMC is. So they can manufacture them with very small transistor sizes and probably eke out a lot of efficiency there, a lot less power draw, which increases the battery life. And apparently lets them put a bigger battery in this phone too. So you get the increased battery life on both sides. So I think like to be determined. I'm sure Apple is good at it, like sort of showing their differentiations, their key differentiations, and they're very happy to own the core technology. That's the Tim Cook doctrine, is that Apple wants to own the core technologies that differentiate their products. And Modem has been something they've been working on for years and years and years and years. And they typically do like tons of tests and things. I think like probably since iPhone 4, when they had the whole like antenna gate issue, that's been something they've prioritized, is really making sure that there's high performance. Because a modem is not just a modem. You have the modem, you have the RF layer, you have the antennas, you have all of these things working together. You have to have like a certain level of RF transparency on the phone when things like big batteries are insulators, and like there's just a lot to work out. But I think like 5G is matured now. They've gotten to the point where they don't need these transparencies on like 3 sides of the phone anymore. And I'm really, really interested to see where it goes. So what do you think Austin Evans being extremely sour on iPhone 6e, and he's been positive on SEs before? I actually don't know. I didn't see what Austin said. Everyone is going to have their own expectations. Everyone's going to have their own expectational debts. I mean, like one of the nice things about having so many tech creators is that everybody has their own opinions, and all different things matter to some of us. Like some people are very price sensitive and they really want an iPhone, like they want a Mac Mini that doesn't go over that magical $500 number. And this one, I think we didn't talk about the price yet, but starts at $599, I think. And for some people, that's just like, I really wish Apple was below that $500 mark. And other people are like, well, cost is different than value. And that's a calculation that everybody has to make for themselves. Like for some people, Apple's build quality and the fact that the phones last for a long time, the chipset is usually what is the bounding point for OS updates. Like the OS updates will get to a point where a certain age of chipset no longer gets supported. And having like the modern chipset in this means that Apple will do its usual, will probably, like nothing's ever guaranteed, but based on, past as prologue, or past being like an indicator of the future, we'll do 5-6 generations of updates on this, which is, very good for a phone that you're paying this much for. And they typically have really good resale value. Other people might think, which we haven't gotten to yet, the camera system, or some people just don't like notches. So it really depends on what is important to you. And different companies choose different points. Like when you want to get a cost under a certain price, basically it's the cost of materials. And then there's all like the development and research that goes into building the actual device, which is like, people don't usually measure that in the bill of materials, the BOM, but there's like a whole layer of things that go into. There's an old West Wing joke I love where they're like, it costs 2 cents, and the other person says, it doesn't cost 2 cents. The first one cost $4 billion. The second one costs 2 cents. So you amortize the cost of the entire process of delivering the phone, and then you have whatever the typical company profit margins is that you can play with. So their typical profit margins now are like, I don't know, 30%, 40%, whatever it is. They can discount that if they're willing to lower it because they believe they need rapid adoption. Like I think AirPods or something historically had a very low margin at first, just because Apple wanted to push adoption of the wireless technologies. But that, then you have like margin on top of that. And so for some people, they'll just say like, it's too expensive, but that doesn't really mean anything, because maybe it's made out of gold and it's like not too expensive. It's just, there's no reason for it to be made out of gold. And a lot of companies will have a range of products based on the quality of the materials. Like a lot of computers are cheaper than MacBooks, but one of the ways they save money is they use plastics. And some people are fine with that. They don't care about like the plastic. Other people want something that feels more like a welded, like, what's the right word for it? Substantial, like an object that's going to last for several years, and they want metal and these things. And so for them, it's not that it's more expensive, but that it's a better value. And there is like I forget the adage, but something like cheap stuff you buy every year is sometimes more expensive than slightly more expensive things that you buy once. So everyone has to do their own internal calculations on that. Let's see, what's the next question? Andrew Edwards in the house. Saw Andrew the other day. Love you, Andrew. What is up? No MagSafe, no ultra wideband, which is the Find My. And I actually didn't know there was no ultra wideband. And it's called a 16Y. I think Apple is just coalescing the brands. Like previously it was iPhone SE. The original one was special edition. It was like a traditional, one of those few times Apple was being nostalgic and brought back the SE name, which had been on the Macintosh. And people sort of liked it. It was special edition, but then it was SE2 and SE3. And people assumed this would be SE4. And there was some advantage to that because that name doesn't really age out. Like if you have an iPhone SE that came out when the iPhone 6 does, and then you have the iPhone 7 and 8, and you're still selling the same SE, it doesn't seem like it's old. I'm curious why they went with iPhone 16e, because as soon as there's an iPhone 17, it's going to seem one generation old. And when there's an iPhone 18, there'll be another generation old. So unless they're switching their plans, or previously Apple would release an iPhone SE like every 4 years or so. If they're going to go to make it yearly, like and release 5 iPhones a year, like 4 mainline iPhones, like 17 Air, 17 Pro, and 17 Pro Max, and then 6 months later 17e, maybe it makes sense then. But that also is like a little more expensive, because one of the reasons that the SEs can be cheaper is that Apple has produced those bodies, like by now the iPhone 14 body, back then the iPhone 5S body, for so long that the economies of scale are so great, the costs just of all the parts inside it, well, at least like the parts that aren't like the latest chipset and camera array, are much cheaper, so that reduces the cost of them making it. But if they update it every year, like usually like every year they keep it in the market, it gets cheaper and cheaper to make. So they're updating it every year, they lose that ability to make more and more on it over time, and might need to make more money up front, which may be why it's $599. Oh, and there's the question. Sorry, Shy-Bo, I apologize, I'm messing with this. Shy-Bo Penke just says, do you think making it 16e, the name implies they will update annually? It would be kind of weird to see selling an iPhone 16e like in 3 years. And yeah, absolutely. Sort of like when they said Apple Vision Pro, and everyone says like, where's the Apple Vision Amateur or the Apple Vision Non-Pro? It's really interesting to see if that is a sign that the marketing is going to lead not the market, but like the way they're marketing it means that it's going to be more frequently updated. We're going to have to find out about that, I guess, next year. CDMA was Verizon. Yeah, CDMA, and there was also a data technology, and those kept moving forward. Hey, Chantal Hills, how are you? More questions. Tariff questions. Is the price increase exempt from tariffs? We overcharge the customers a pocket. We don't know what the tariffs are going to be yet, and we don't know where they're going to be, but that is not something I'm looking forward to finding out. iPhone SE Starter Edition, love it. GSM and Edge were one of them, and then it went to HSPA, but CDMA had the other data technology that I'm blanking on old data technologies today. There was Edge, and then 3G, and then HSPA on the GSM side, but on the EVDO, that's right, EVDO, back in the day. Wow. And then you couldn't do voice and data at the same time, and then we had to evolve, and now we have like just distant memories of all of those things. I'm going to keep going with this. So compare battery life. So 26 hours of video playback up to, and 17 hours on the iPhone 11. That's a weird compare, because the iPhone 11 is hella old by now. Apple uses video playback a lot for their battery test. And it's sort of good and bad. Like, it's good in that if you look at all of them, you can get a sense of the relative battery life based on video playback across all of their devices. But also they're optimized for video playback. Like Apple has encode decode engines for H.264, H.265, ProRes, which is not just for creators, but I think they have AV1 decode now as well, not encode, but decode, VP9, all these things. So it's incredibly efficient to play back video in any standard format. So it's going to be one of the things that hits your battery with the least amount of brute force. So it's like a really nice way of showing max peak battery efficiency, but you can look at them across devices and see just relatively how well they do. A18 chipset, which is a chipset in the current generation iPhone 16. I'm very sad that Apple doesn't use names of storms anymore, like Firestorm, Ice Storm, Blizzard, Avalanche, all of that. Either they ran out or they just got tired of people like me talking about them and thinking that they were super cool. But I really like those. I really miss those. Now they're just chips, 4-core GPU. So that's, again, it just means that this is as capable of running apps, launching apps. Apple's traditionally had really, really good, often industry-leading single-core performance, which is a lot more important than people think, because that's like launching your apps, it's rendering your web pages, it's doing a lot of the things that a lot of people do all the time. Multi-core, I think Qualcomm is more competitive now, but it's still really good multi-core performance. So this is a good win, and it means that for years and years, yeah, Apple says it right here, make it yours for years to come. So it'll be able to. Apple tends to design silicon for when the year that they release it, the workloads that they anticipate that people are going to do. So like 3 years prior to a new chip coming out, I imagine in my head, I don't know if this is literal, but I imagine in my head, you get like Johnny Sarugi and his team on the chip side. And then you get Craig Federighi and the software people, John Turnus and the hardware team, maybe now John Gianandrea and I don't want to call it AI because I feel like that's like doesn't really encompass it, but machine learning and large language model teams, and they all figure out what they want to deliver 3 years from now, what they anticipate workloads will be, what people will be doing on their devices. And then they try to tune everything so that it's like shooting arrows into arrows into arrows, hoping that they hit a target. They try to tune everything so they're delivering on the workflows that people are going to have when those products launch. And that goes everything from camera enhancements to now things like generative AI, stuff like that. So it's really interesting, but it does mean that this will work for whatever they assume the current workloads would be. And also we'll continue to get software updates for those 4, 5, 6 years to come. Next, AI, Apple Intelligence. I have mixed feelings about all this stuff. Like Apple to me traditionally, or to I guess to everyone traditionally, was the wait and see company. Like famously or infamously, depending on how you feel about speed to market, waited 10 years before they got into phones, waited 10 years before they got into tablets, 5 years or something before they got into watches. But increasingly, Apple has been, they wouldn't not do it. Like they would build it internally. They just wouldn't release it until they felt like it was more fully cooked. Like they've been experimenting with foldables for years, but there's no like Apple foldable on the market, probably because they just don't feel like it delivers what they want to deliver yet. But with the watch, it felt like that was like a year early to market. Like it would have cooked for another year. It'd be more typically Apple. But then again, like the original iPhone didn't even have like app stores on it. Didn't have like a lot of things. Didn't have video recording. So the entry level is usually, it's not like some companies like to openly beta. They like to like put things out right away, see how the market thinks about it, and use that input to rapidly develop. Where Apple does that internally, it doesn't have the scale to rapidly develop. Like there's nothing like 1 million customers hitting your tech to see what it really does. But they tend to wait and then deliver what they believe is a much more consumer-friendly package of those features. But Apple Intelligence is like very of the day. And I don't know if that's because they really think like this is something that we need, or it's like just the markets, like, like AI on the markets is really, really hot. And people are like, but like, again, like previously people say, where's Apple with this? Where's Apple with this? Apple's behind on this, behind on that. And they didn't care. They would just like release things when they wanted to. But this is coming out really early, and it doesn't seem that different than other similar products on the market, which doesn't really feel like that Apple-ish. And I'm sure like some people love the summaries or the ability to generate emojis and stuff, but it just like that so much of the marketing was hung on this, and it didn't come out for a while. It seems less Apple of old to me. And maybe this is the new Apple and times change and things are different, and we'll see more of this going forward. We'll have to wait and see on that. But it doesn't feel like the Apple that used to, like one of my little pet peeves is whenever someone says Apple is listening, I get really afraid because that's not Apple's job. Apple's job isn't to listen. That's literally what Steve Jobs said when he was like, when he borrowed this quote from Henry Ford, if I listen to my customers, all I would do is faster horses. Customers don't know they need a car. Someone has to invent a car. And the more you listen and you do things that customers feel like they want you to do, the more that's faster horses. And I always used to joke that the way I know that Apple wasn't being Apple anymore is that they would start listening to like everyone who would say like, this is what we want. And the thing is, you're supposed to anticipate what we don't know we want and give that to us. It's every other company that would make 100 features from 100 different wish lists and just ship them every year and see what happens. So really interesting that they went with this, but I don't know. I wouldn't buy any phone based on artificial intelligence at this point. I would buy it based on the sum total of features and how well they fit my needs. And if AI really does, like if generative AI, things like creating text, creating images, summarizing text, informing others. Maybe for some people that's super valuable, and maybe they would buy a phone just for that. And Apple saw that in their research and decided they really had to deliver that. So maybe I'm breaking the rule that I made for myself earlier, and like the value prop of a phone is a package of things that has to deliver. Like, I need this much camera, I need this much performance, and maybe some people are like, I need this much Gen AI at this point, and that's what their data is telling them. I don't know. It just, again, it feels early in the cycle from crossing the chasm and early innovation to like consumer adoption. Apple's usually safely on the consumer adoption, or really like the really well done consumer adoption, not really that like early things, at least for like total package stuff. So so we have all the Apple Intelligence features, and then privacy, and we get to the camera, which I don't know if the camera is controversial. I feel like it might be for some people because there is only one. It is like the One Ring or the last surviving Highlander. There is only one of them left. Again, like if you want to ask a question, just put a Q in front of it so I can see it more easily. Otherwise, it's hard to tell between who's just chatting, which I love. Like, just please chat away. It's just harder to tell if you have a question for me or not. So just put a Q in front of it if you have a question for me. And it's great to see everyone joining me. Thank you so much for taking your time this evening to chat about this, or morning, depending on where you are, chat about this with me. The camera is like a single camera system. So right now, the baseline iPhones have two cameras, a regular like main camera and a wide angle, ultra wide angle camera. And the Pros also have the wide, ultra wide, and the telephoto. And Apple tends to fuse the camera system, so they all work as one. And you never really know which camera, like optically, you're actually getting. So they do a really good job switching between those, depending on the amount of light coming in, because some of them have different capacities to pull in light with that very, very shallow depth. Cameras like Z-index, and in a phone, there's very little Z-index. So they do a good job moving that around. This just has the main shooter. I think it looks like it's the same, which has been true of previous iPhone SEs. It has the main camera, the regular wide, not the ultra wide, not the telephoto, but the same main camera as previous iPhones. The big difference now, though, is that it's 48 megapixel. Apple calls it a fusion camera and says that it's the capabilities of two cameras in one, which kind of, but it basically, what a lot of companies have been doing for a long time, and Apple's been doing more recently, is they kind of just bin the pixels. So if you have 48 megapixels, the smaller you make the megapixels, the less light they take in. And so having more megapixels hasn't traditionally been a great thing, because each pixel was smaller, you take in less light. And yes, you have a big photo, but the individual pixels in that photo aren't great. So what you want is big pixels, not numerous pixels. And the best of both worlds, having a lot of big pixels. So what these types of cameras do is they have like 48 megapixels, but then they bin them down. So they make every 4 pixels into one and use that to collect the light. And then you're effectively getting a 12 megapixel image, but it's taken with the larger pixels that are those 4 pixels combined into one. But it also means that you can pull the data from the full 48 megapixels. So if you do want a really big picture, or you just want to fuse both of those things and have like some of the data, the detail from the 48 megapixels, but the light and the quality, I think that's a fair way of saying it, from the 12 megapixel bin version, you can fuse those together. And Apple's very good with, they build it into their chips to be able to fuse things really, really fast. Multiple layers, multiple exposures, semantic like recognition for what's in the picture. All of that happens really fast. So you push that button, whole bunch of photos get taken, fused together, given to you in the final image. And they try to figure out like everything that's in the image at the same time. So with this, like they're basically saying you have like, you'll get like the regular photo, and because there's so many megapixels, you can get a 2x photo that's good enough as well. So it's like a digital zoom, which what they're saying is optical quality, and we're gonna have to wait for the photo tests to see that. But like on a regular iPhone these days, you might be getting that anyway, because again, Apple will switch cameras, like it's a camera system, it's not a camera. You don't have 3 separate lenses, you have 3 separate cameras. You have like 3 cameras that are joined together, and depending on light and other factors, Apple will switch to a different camera and punch in 2x anyway. So you think you're taking a telephoto, but like you cover it up and you're actually on the main camera punched in twice the size anyway. So, oh, Emily D. Baker is here watching me live when I usually watch her live. Uno reverso, Emily, but thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I'm surprised you're not live right now, but can't wait for the next one. So yeah, so it should be great in what I'm saying. Like otherwise, like it's basically what you have. It just physically is one camera instead of the system being spread out over 2 or 3 cameras. The only thing you're missing out on is that ultra wide. You won't be able to get like the complete, like the whole room in your picture anymore. You're basically getting a wide and a synthetic telephoto with this camera. So theoretically 2 cameras, but not the 2 that you're used to or you would get on a baseline iPhone. But again, it's like 4K video, Dolby Vision, all those sorts of things. It is interesting Apple hasn't gone to 8K yet, especially with the size of the sensors they're putting on. Do people really need 8K? I mean, Marquez has been uploading in 8K forever, but most people aren't. The file sizes can be big. The nice thing about 8K is that you can punch in on 4K. So if you want to do jump cuts or you're too far away and you want to punch in, you can do all those things. So eventually it would be nice to see, but it will be one day. It will not be this day. We still have stunning photos, and Apple Intelligence will identify things based on the photos. So super fast 5G capabilities. I still can't, I'm assuming it's just low and mid range 5G. FR frequency range 1. I'm guessing. I don't think there's any FR2 or what do they call it, millimeter wave, but I don't think anyone's going to miss that. It has an eSIM, crash detection, satellite, which is a really cool feature, lets you connect over the satellites. And then we have the culmination here, built for Apple Intelligence, which I think again is fine, but it's just curious that that's so prominent in the marketing. And again, maybe it's just that we're in an age where every phone is more iterative, and that's the feature that stands out because it needs more RAM. Presumably has the 8 gigabytes of RAM that Apple says is required for Apple Intelligence. So it is a differentiator. I don't mind that phones are more iterative. Like cars have been iterative for a long time, refrigerators, televisions. Like you go through massive periods of iteration, and taken enough times, like year over year over year, iteration becomes evolution. And every once in a while you have a revolution. That's just how these things are. But I don't know if it juices upgrade cycles, if it like making bigger screens with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, that pulled upgrades forward. People who were not planning to upgrade that year, maybe a future year, upgraded anyway just to get the bigger screen. Are there people who are upgrading anyway just to get Apple Intelligence? I don't know. Maybe for some people it's really compelling, but it is so heavily featured in the marketing. You have to think that either Apple didn't have anything else or their research showed them that people really, really, really wanted it. And you never know, because like doing forecast analysis is really hard. Like trying to figure out what people want, how much they want of it is really tough. And sometimes, famously, there's like Snow Leopard, macOS Snow Leopard, where people came to Steve Jobs and said, hey, we only have like 3 new features in this. And Steve's like, I cannot sell 3 new features. So I'm just going to say there's no new features. And there was like some really good features there. Like it was the beginning of 64-bit. It was Grand Central Dispatch, and that the basics of that technology are just like industry changing when you look at it. Like the ability to take something and decide where it's going to go. That's what lets Apple's chipsets. Like Apple has a dispatcher for which cores tasks should go to, just like whether they need to go to efficiency cores or to performance cores, where they should go to the CPU, the GPU, the neural engines. They have whether for like now for machine learning and LLM stuff, whether those tasks should go to the matrix multipliers on the CPU or the neural engine or straight to the GPU. Companies are doing like a lot of this kind of stuff for training too. Like how can I break up an action and dispatch it to multiple parts and then compress it so it runs on smaller things? Like there was like a real need for that kind of stuff when we hit mobile. And they're very good at doing that. So, but back to my original point, hard to tell if it's just like, we don't have anything else, let's go all in on Apple Intelligence, or it's like, hey, our research shows people won't buy this unless we're doing the sorts of things that every other company is doing. Because when you look at like Google and Samsung. And like disclosure again, I work for YouTube, which is owned by Google, but this is my personal channel. A lot of other companies are really focusing on AI features as well. So maybe that's what it takes to be competitive in this market. Satellite features, 9 more hours of video playback. I mean, compared to what, but it's still like they're saying it's a bigger battery, and they're usually very good at their battery tests. They have a really, really good team that does all the internal testing. So it tends to be really accurate because the consequences of misstating it are so big that, they're disincentivized from doing that. And then designed to make a difference. Really, really interesting stuff. If you guys have a question again, throw a Q in there. Otherwise, any more questions about this phone? I think it's very much what I think was being expected for the iPhone SE 4. Just the name being different is interesting, curious. That's the only big difference here. The price, $600, so it's cheaper. It fits in. Apple was very careful to say this is our full iPhone 16 family. So now you still have that Pro Max, Pro. The Plus, which rumor has it is like not long for this world, the way RIP skull emoji mini was. And then the regular iPhone, nothing. And now the E at the end of it. Some people were joking that E was because the modem would hit edge, but like every modem hits edge. I have Qualcomm modem in one phone, a MediaTek modem in another phone. I get edge when I'm in a place that has terrible reception. So I don't think there's any difference. Like when you're at the edge, you get edge, or whatever else the modem happens to support. The 15 is still there. Yeah, I mean, like Apple does keep older products on the market. Again, like they don't fill every space in the line. Like some companies will have 18 different models, and they'll very carefully make like, this is our $200 model, $300 model, $400 model. This is our $400 model with a bigger screen, with a smaller screen, like different versions. This is the one made out of plastic. This is the one made out of metal. Apple only wants to make what they think is like a premium, high-end consumer product. They want to own the high end of the market because that's where the money is, and it lets them do fewer things that are much more profitable, and that's the business that they are in. They're not in making every computer. They're in making computers and phones and other things that they believe will have the most premium market presence and bring in the highest margins. Question from Hudson K. Oh, sorry, I missed another question. I'm going to go back for a second. Question from KT Travels. Is the modem actually better than competitors? What timeline will it be better? Unknown. I think it's unlikely that first year in market, it will be better in every way than a competitor. Apple is making a big point about it being better in terms of power efficiency. And that's what they do with their chipsets. Like a big NVIDIA chip is going to outperform an Apple Mac chip, but not at power per watt. So Apple makes the discussion very much about power per watt. Like we were joking a couple of years ago, if you got a big Intel chip and a big NVIDIA chip, you might have to plug them into separate circuits of your house. The power draw is so high. Whereas something like an M3 Ultra, that sips power comparatively. So it's not as powerful as when you run those cards full out, but it's nowhere nearly as big, it's nowhere nearly as hot, and it draws nowhere nearly the power. So with Apple focusing on the power here, it probably is safe to assume it is way more efficient. But it's when people get them in their hands and they're like, my current iPhone in parts of San Francisco, it just doesn't pick up a signal. Indoors sometimes, and it's hard to tell like what's the modem, what's the network. Like if you're on in the US, T-Mobile versus Verizon versus AT&T. Some of them, I have 2 SIMs in mine, and sometimes the AT&T one has a full set of bars, and the T-Mobile one doesn't, or vice versa. And then sometimes that's just like you have no backhaul, like you still have the bars, but there's no backhaul on the tower. So like it's really complicated. But when enough of them get out in the market, and people who are used to having, like a Qualcomm or a MediaTek modem can judge the performance in the same areas, like indoors and outdoors, I think that's where we'll get the real sense of how competitive this is, not just in terms of efficiency. I'm sure it will be because they're making such a big deal about it, but in terms of like, how well does it hold a signal, and in how many places it hold a signal, and what's the quality of that signal. Can I please? I don't say Putin very well. I say it like an English Montrealer. You want a French Montrealer to say that. My pronunciation of it is okay, but not great. Sorry, I missed another question here. Hudson K, what are the day-to-day impacts of the iPhone 16e not having millimeter wave and ultra wideband for the common person? What do they miss out? So let's talk about MagSafe and ultra wideband and millimeter wave. So I think MagSafe is probably for a lot of people going to be the biggest annoyance because there's just so many so good MagSafe accessories out there. Like just the ability to go to your car and plug it into something, or have it on your case, or slap that battery pack on it. Apple made such a big deal about MagSafe when it launched, and so many accessory makers adopted it for a wide range. Like the thing I put my iPhone on to charge at night is MagSafe. I just slap it on there and it charges, and that wouldn't work with this. Like this does have wireless charging. It is just Qi base spec, Qi minimum charging, so it takes longer. And we could argue that wireless charging still isn't very efficient anyway, and you should be plugging it in. Just plug it in overnight and you're fine. Like it's not as efficient to use wireless charging. But if you want to charge wirelessly, MagSafe is the second generation of Qi, or whatever they call it, that is faster. So I think like the slowness won't be a huge deal, but I think the lack of compatibility with MagSafe for some people will be really irksome. Yeah, Emily says MagSafe is a must at this point. Same for me. I just have so much MagSafe stuff. And I'm sure some people have Lightning stuff and are all shades of salty that this is USB-C. But I think MagSafe is a bit of a big deal. Ultra wideband is just also like annoying because Apple has made such a big thing about Find My and being able to hit like a button and go find your phone, or use your phone to find AirTags and all of that. So I didn't see that it says it doesn't have ultra wideband, but if that's true, that's like annoying. It's of lesser value, but it's one more component that they didn't have to include in the phone, therefore fitting into the price point they wanted to include it. If it had every feature in it, it would cost what the iPhone 16 with every feature in it costs. So the whole point of having a lower cost phone means you have to give up some of the features to get there. Ultra wideband, I think honestly is like it is so fragile. Like if you're in a stadium, it'll work because there's so much line of sight. But I remember Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile, just walking around New York and crossing the street and you lose the signal. Going around the corner, you lose the signal. It's raining, you lose the signal. Millimeter wave to me is like Verizon's version of WiMAX, which was like Sprint's big idea to put like these antennas and beam directly, and it never worked anywhere. And they had to backtrack and backfill to get back up to parity with the carriers. That's not what's going to happen with Verizon, because they also do FR1. They also have the mid and the lower and mid-range frequencies. I think they just, in the US, there was so much congestion. There were just so few frequencies and so disparate frequencies available that going to millimeter wave was like a way to get attention, where in other countries there was just enough frequency that people didn't have to do it. There was no like compelling reason for it. Or like maybe for most people, 5G wasn't a big enough boost because it was basically just like LTE made real, that they felt they needed something to really be revolutionary on the market. Like it's funny also, 3G we called 3G, 4G we called LTE, 5G we just call 5G, not NR, which is its name, like new radio. But that's yeah, others like the little finger rest holder on the back. That is very, very true. So yeah, pre-orders are Friday. Should you get an iPhone 16e or an iPhone 16? I always think again, my basic philosophy is wait as long as you can to update, and then update to the best thing that you can within your budget, of course, and then use it for as long as you can with zero regrets, because there will always be something new and something next. So like figure out your budget. What is the maximum that you can pay for a phone that you intend to use for the next 3 to 5 years? If an iPhone 16, nothing, like no adjective, fits in that budget, you'll probably have a better time with those features like MagSafe and some of the niceties that it comes with. If you can get enough, storage, because this is like I think 128 gigabytes. Is that what I read? I forget what the starting one is. Let's just take a quick look. View pricing. And 128 gigabytes. Yeah. So like, is that enough for you? If not, it is plus $100 to get 256 gigabytes and plus $200 to get 512. And that's like the thing is like Apple's very good in stair stepping. Like typically in marketing, you have a door crasher, the cheap version. You have like the base version that everybody buys, and you have like the high end version that people who like either are aspirationally just want the best all the time, where there really are features that they would rather spend money on to have those features. Apple's really good at like, hey, this is a base model. If you add just this much more, like $100 more, you'll get this much memory and this much more storage. But hey, at that point, maybe you want the nicer model, and you want the nicer model, but now you need to add like the memory again, and now you want the nicest model. So that the marketing and the way that they stagger their prices is really, really like from their point of view, brilliant. I'm sure consumers are always like, why do I have to pay this much money for RAM? RAM doesn't cost this much. It really has nothing to do with the cost of RAM. It's the cost of marketing. Apple could pick any feature, like screen size. People understand that, like bigger, pay more. People will look at it and go, a number on RAM or storage bigger, therefore understand why pay more. Sometimes like traditionally, like some companies charge more for black coloring than white. Apple did that with a MacBook. And yes, the process to make it is slightly more involved. Like you have to anodize it, or like if you're doing like raw aluminum versus anodized aluminum, it's a little bit more. But people understand it's like I want that color, I'm willing to pay more. And we have told them as customers we are willing to pay $100 more. And so this is the way that Apple sets up, like they have an average price in mind per phone, and some are more expensive and some are less expensive. And the product mix, which is something that analysts ask about all the time on calls, what's the product mix? They want it to hit a certain point, so they have a certain amount of profit on the device. And that for iPhones and for a lot of Apple stuff, the way that they play with the pricing, the way they give you more for more is to use things like RAM and like storage and memory, because again, bigger numbers, people understand I'm paying more, but I'm getting bigger number, whether they understand that that's what the RAM should cost. If it wasn't the RAM, like if Apple realized they couldn't get people to pay that much over market price for raw RAM sticks anymore, they would just pick something else. They would figure out some other differentiator to make the same steps between the different levels of pricing on their model. Yeah, Doug, features are pared back to meet the lower price point. You decide what your price point is going to be, what your profit margin is going to be, what that leaves you for bill of materials and for all the other associated costs and bringing the product to market. And then you figure out what you have to lose to make it fit into that. Unless you're willing to take a loss on margin, which like Apple and every company sometimes will sell things that much as lower margins just to push adoption of them. But then you're trading money for like volume, like the classic thing, make it up on volume. You just got to make sure you still have something there to make it up. So that is some very quick reactions to Apple's iPhone iPhone 16e. I can't wait to see everybody. I assume a bunch of people are testing it. A bunch of reviewers are out there with it right now, testing Apple's claims, seeing how well the modem works, seeing how long the batteries last, seeing how well the chipset performs, how fast it takes to ramp down when they're playing their games, how well Apple Intelligence is working. Oh, Alex, I'm sorry, I missed your enterprise question. Enterprise customers, SE was so outdated, many companies chose to skip it altogether from play offerings, often opting for 2 to 3 year old flagships. Do you see the iPhone 16e changing this? Enterprise is an interesting market because for a lot of enterprise companies, like sometimes people will say, why does Apple have a phone with such little storage? It doesn't make any sense. Or like, and back in the day, Apple had sometimes had like education specific models like the Mac, I forget what it's called, the Mac E something, or the iMac E. But for some enterprises, all they really want is a thin client. Like they just need an internet connected box that will run their corporate apps and corporate websites mobilely. And they don't want their employees playing games or storing a ton of photos. The eMac, thank you so much, James. And so like they want to buy in high volume for low cost. And so Apple makes a version. They could just put it on an enterprise or education store somewhere and keep it away from other humans. But like some humans want the cheap phone, like as well. Not that not humans, like civilians. I don't know what the right term is. But yeah, so I think if the phone can still run what the companies want to run, it's just a calculation at that point. And I fully get it. Like I didn't see a lot of iPhone SEs in enterprise either. So that's a really good question. But I think like oftentimes when we see products that look like they are too anemic for regular customers just because they are targeted at enterprise. James, Rene, you're making too much sense on making a product. It's business and pricing. Stop it. People want an iPhone for $350. That's true. I mean, like a lot of times people will say something is too expensive, and I'll go back to that rant and say, like, is it too expensive or is it not worth the money for you? Because those are very different things. Like if Apple made like a cheap plastic phone and charged $1,000 for it, and you did the math, like again with the bill of materials and the margin and all of that, and you realized, yeah, it really isn't worth the money. That's one thing. But if it's a product that uses high-end components and they're doing a lot of things that are expensive to bring to market, like bleeding edge silicon, bleeding edge display technologies, things like tandem OLED, like that kind of stuff is expensive, and it's just like they're not making a cheap version. So it's not that the product is overpriced, it's that it's just not worth the money to you. But for other people, it is worth the money. Like some people will buy a computer or a phone, like if you're doing, and they will make so much money that it's inconsequential for them. Like one computer, if you're working at a big production company, one job could pay for the highest end MacBook or Mac Pro or whatever available. Or like your phone's keeping you in contact and like having a nice experience, like that it's just the cost of doing business to you. So really, like, is this the right price point? And Apple has gotten demand forecasting wrong before. Like they have made products that people didn't buy in the volume that they thought they would, or sometimes they've misunderstood the market. Like the original iPhone SE, did people buy it because it was cheaper or because it was smaller? Was there demand for a cheaper iPhone or was there a demand for a smaller iPhone? The iPhone mini showed us there wasn't really that much demand, not sustainable demand for a smaller iPhone. But Apple keeps making SEs, so maybe it is the cheaper iPhone. And that was a side effect back then of being cheaper. So this stuff is all like just incredibly fascinating. And I really love the opportunity, the chance to talk to all of you about it. I love going live. I might do it more often. Let me know if you enjoy these live streams where we get to interact more.